Some weeks ago, I heard Adam Tice sing with the choral group, the Open Fifths, a choir where he was a founding musical director. When I got home, I was curious about the number of hymns that he had written, and there's an author index in the back of Voices Together. And I was pleased that he gave musical expression, even in these dark times, especially in these dark times, to some of the difficulties we face as believers. I haven't found many hymns like that, but he has certainly given poetic voice to those. And so I thought maybe he should talk about that and how he came to write those. And maybe we'll even sing some of those. He is a graduate of Goshen College, graduate of Associated Mennonite Biblical Seminary. He has served in the past as a pastor at the Hyattsville Mennonite Church, which is near Washington, D.C., and he is the text editor of Voices Together. Beyond the Mennonites, he is a editor at GIA. It's one of the major publishers of sacred music, including hymns. That's located in Chicago. We sang one of his hymns this morning. Jesus Entered Egypt is an Adam Tice hymn. His wife, Marie, worked for 11 years at Mary Lee. Now she's transitioning to Maple City Healthcare, working in the office. They have a son, Ezra, who's a sophomore at Goshen High School. Also at Adam's request, we have with us again Jeffrey Weaver. We know him as a frequent organist, including this morning at College Mennonite, sometimes assisted by his son working the organ stops. His son, Andrew, is 7, I believe, 7 years old. He puts some tape on them that gives him a little direction as to what to do, and Andrew really loves doing that. He's the husband of Anne-Marie Weaver, our musical director at CMC. So please welcome both Adam and Jeffrey as they lead us this morning.
Good morning. It's really good to be back at CMC. I stop by every once in a while over the years, but I remember some of your faces from way back in 2000, 2001 when I did Ministry Inquiry program here when I was a little bit younger, and I suspect some of you were a little bit younger as well. I've been fascinated by my affection for depressing songs. I've, to be honest, never been particularly depressed. It's not something that is clinical to me. It's not been a part of who I am, but I've discovered over the years that, of course, I have many friends who are, and many family members, many people in the church who experience depression, who experience suffering. And so even when not in the midst of suffering myself, I've felt the urge to sing something, to have words for my friends, to have words for my church, to name, to acknowledge, and to hold together those who are suffering, because so often the church forgets. So often the church ignores. So often the church subverts or covers over these experiences of our humanity. And of course, the biblical witness gives us ample proof that that's really not how we ought to be worshiping. If we pay attention to the Psalms, if we pay attention to Jesus, there is reason, there is room, and there are words to express the deepest parts of our suffering together. As a framing for this, please turn to number 623, 623. What comfort can our worship bring? This text was inspired by something in a textbook in a class I had in seminary, where a chapter was headed by just a phrase from Emily Dickinson, where Emily said, "Pain is missed in praise." Since finding that phrase, I've looked back at the Dickinson poem, and I I don't really know what she was getting at when she said that, but that phrase in isolation spoke to me and led me to write something. Since we have members joining us on Zoom, part of what I'd like to do is read through each text before we sing them, because generally the words are what I contribute anyway, and I find when I sing through something, I may miss what's being expressed. And since I'm the text writer, I'd like you to notice those things. What comfort can our worship bring on bleak and empty days to those who cannot bear to sing when pain is missed in praise? What sorrow can we dare to own? What anger, loss, and fears? Not just in joy is God made known, but also in our tears. O God, hear every longing sigh as voices rise and strain, and meet us in that honest cry where praise is voiced in pain. What comfort can our worship bring on bleak and empty days to those who cannot dare to sing when what sorrow can be there Joy is God made known, but oh, God, give every longing in my heart when we Number 696. This is an example of turning to the Psalms for language of lament, language to express our suffering and our prayer. And this is the psalm that Jesus turned to on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? And I was struck by an assertion that there's no way that Jesus just said the one phrase, that Jesus knew that psalm as a song, as something to be sung as part of worship. And to just quote that first phrase is to indicate that Jesus kept going, that this is shorthand for, it's as if I said, I'm going to sing Amazing Grace. I don't just sing Amazing Grace and stop. So imagine Jesus singing this psalm in its entirety as he gasped on the cross. I did embellish with some of the other quotations related to the crucifixion, like the gambling for the clothes. My God, would you forsake me? Why keep your help so far away? I call by day and hear no answer. At night I groan. Who hears me pray? Yet you are holy, throned in praises. Your saints invoke your mighty name, and you deliver them from evil. They trust and are not put to shame. But I am shunned, despised by mockers who say that God left me to die. Yet from the womb you have been with me. At my first breath, you heard my cry. Still, terrors lurk and circle round me. My very life their schemes oppose. They scorn my faith and strip my body. They laugh and gamble for my clothes. O God, deliver me from evil, and I will answer you with praise. For you do not forsake the suffering. Your face is turned to us always. The poor will taste an end to hunger. By those who seek you will be known. All souls will cry to you in wonder. The world belongs to God alone. Let's do the last few phrases as an introduction, Jeffrey, if that makes sense. Yep. God, would you forsake me? I call my name and hear no answer. That you are holy, throned in praises, your saints invoke your mighty name. And from you, but I shall despise my mouth. Yet from you have been with me. To hunger by those who train, make you be known. Hearts will cry to you. Thanks to God. Go to 154. Another thing that inspired me to write so many sad songs is recognizing how beloved those became in Hymnal Worship Book and in Sing the Journey and Sing the Story. That having a section of lament, having a section of doubt and faith became a way of expressing what the church needed to express pretty regularly. And hymns in those sections of those hymnals became some of the most beloved hymns of Mennonite congregations. And I saw space for more of that. Very early on when I began writing, I saw my vocation as looking for things that Mennonites weren't singing yet that perhaps we should be. And so I wrote for the gaps as I saw them. Well, I'm talking about why I started writing. I want to recognize Rebecca, because Rebecca Slough was the person who first prompted me to write a hymn text. When I was in college, I was a composition major, and I took my first seminary class on congregational song with Rebecca as the instructor, with the intent of continuing to work on my composition. But an assignment from Rebecca prompted me to start thinking about the words more than the music. And I really found that that opened up something in me that I was ready to tap into. So 20 years and 300 texts later, here we are. Number 154. The funny thing about this one is I didn't have any particular circumstance. I didn't have any particular person or experience in mind when I wrote this. The only thing I was thinking about was the tune, which is one of my favorite tunes in the hymnal that most people only ever get to sing once a year. And it's a complex enough tune that it's awfully hard to learn and internalize if you're only singing it once a year, and perhaps not every year, because you're going to have other tunes to sing on Good Friday as well. But Love Unknown by John Ireland is just absolutely gorgeous, and I thought we needed more ways to sing it. And so I wrote this text as a way expanding the possible uses for the tune. Again, I'll read it through once. What can I leave behind? What old and weary ways that weigh upon my mind and strain my song of praise? God, grant release from binding pain, and let me gain your hope and peace. What can I claim once more? Can life return from loss? What future lies in store if I take up my cross? My burden raised, Christ bears it too. In all I do, may God be praised. What can I take to share a neighbor's crushing load? What burdens can we bear together on the road? We walk and pray with Christ our guide, who by our side will show the way. Whatever you. And I return from loss, my future lies in sorrow if I take on my cross. My burden is Christ present to me. I thank God. What can I take to show my neighbor's rushing road? What burdens I bear together on road? We walk and play with God. I think that's my first time to get to sing that one since the hymnal came out. So thank you. Number 148. This is, I think I can easily say, the most difficult hymn I've ever written, both in terms of content and in terms of concept and structure. This came as a commission, a request from AMBS. A number of years ago, they were hosting a service of worship as part of discussions surrounding acknowledging the abuses of John Howard Yoder. And this event would include members of Yoder's family, members of the seminary community, and a number of Yoder's victims. What could they sing together? I mean, how that's not a small assignment. And there's a lot of pressure and a lot of pitfalls involved in something like that. I did a lot of reading, a lot of preparation, especially Rachel Waltner Goosen's analysis of the events of the abuse, and reading about the seminary's response to the abuse. The seminary, after many years, was acknowledging its complicity in sheltering Yoder and in covering things up. People were ready to shed some light on what had happened those years before. I wanted a song that would acknowledge the pain, the difficulty, and the courage of speaking truth, of bringing light to circumstances that were shadowed. Something I want you to notice in this is the structure of the text, where the rhyme happens or does not happen, where something expected occurs and when something unexpected occurs. So I'll read through it first. In words of truth that shatter rigid silence, in pain that signals life through what was numb, in light dissolving false, obscuring shadows, O God, through chaos, make your presence known. In words that challenge, bold in confrontation, in pain and hurt suppressed but never gone, in light that burns with unrestrained conviction, O God of justice, show your power again. In words unsure, confused and hesitating, in pain described but scarcely understood, in light that shines upon a path of healing, O God, our hope, will you bring something good? One of the questions that emerged as part of the negotiations after I had submitted the initial text, it went through a committee review, which was aggravating and frustrating and necessary. You know, this was a text that had to be right for the moment, and the people reading it and reviewing it understood the depth of what was happening. And my original words were, I think, "Oh God, our hope, can you bring something good?" Which theologically I think is really interesting, but was perhaps not the right choice for the moment. And I think "will you bring something good" was a good compromise that met the moment well. What I want you to notice in terms of the structure is that I resisted real rhyming until the very end. Good is the first strong rhyme in the piece, rhyming back to understood. Everywhere else, if there's something close to rhyme, it's a slant rhyme. So known and numb, again and gone. I didn't want feelings of conclusion. I didn't want feelings of satisfaction at the end of lines. But I still believe in structure as a guidepost for getting people through a text like this and matching up with the song. So each stanza has elements of repetition in it, and these repetitions occur throughout each of the subsequent stanzas too. So the words in words, in pain, and in light, and then, oh God, occur at the same place in each stanza as guideposts to help us navigate through the suffering. I'm guessing many of you knew the president of AMBS at the time, President Miller, in the 90s. I discovered after the fact that this tune, paired with Dietrich Bonhoeffer's For Gracious Powers, or By Gracious Powers, was one that he kept on his desk. And so it discovered after the fact that this tune was a great pairing. And I think, Rebecca, was that your idea, pairing this text with?
Several who thought it would be cool.
Yeah. So it's a tricky tune to navigate, but again, due to those connections, I feel like it's a good vehicle for this text. Could you play all the way through it for us? Make your presence known. It was a challenge, holding confrontation. And would suppress but never grow. With unrestrained confusion. Oh God, your justice, for your power, God. It's untrue. It is our God's mercy. Oh God, to bring something good. Turning to a little bit more hope. Number 519. On the surface, this isn't one that that reveals the source of the pain behind it. And this is one of the few where I can point to something in my life where I needed to express my own sorrow in a way. In 2012, I had resigned from my position at Hyattsville Mennonite Church, and Maria, my wife, and our son Ezra and I moved back to Goshen after 4.5 years in the Washington, D.C. area. We moved back because Maria was dissatisfied with her job in Maryland, and there was a position at Mary Lee. And we had said over the years that about the only thing that could ever get us to move back to Indiana would be a position at Mary Lee for Maria. And so when she was unhappy and I saw that opening, I said, this might be worth going for it. That meant for me giving up a position that I loved and a congregation that I loved in Maryland and moving back here to a state I swore I would get out of. Without any particular prospects on the table for me. We moved back without being able to sell our house in Maryland, which meant that we couldn't yet purchase a house in Indiana. So we initially lived in my in-laws' basement. I wasn't in a great place for a couple months. But our son was a toddler at the time, and he was fine. He could be anywhere. He could be with anybody. We could go to a playground and he could find people to play with, even if he'd never met them before. And I was pretty jealous of that. And so this is what emerged. God, give me faith like a child. Faith of hows and whats and whys. Faith that wonders, laughs, and cries. Faith to grow, explore, and find all that moves my searching mind. God, give me faith like a child. God, give me hope like a child. Hope of daydreams and delight. Hope that sees beyond my sight. Hope that sings in spite of fear when the future isn't clear. God, give me hope like a child. God, give me love like a child, love of overflowing grace, love that seeks a safe embrace, love that calls to dance and play everyone who comes my way. God, give me love like a child. One of my favorite composer collaborators is Sally Ann Morris, a Presbyterian musician based in North Carolina. And over the years, we've developed the kind of relationship where either of us would just about drop anything to do what the other needs as circumstances arise, or she needs a text, I'm going to write it. I need a tune, she's going to write it. And I sent her this text one day and the next day received this tune back, which is one of my favorites. Just absolutely gorgeous. And Jeffrey, if you would play through it once for us. With a thousand hearts and into rose all that is missing. But give me faith like a child. God, give me hope like a child, hope of daydreams and delight, hope that seeks beyond myself, hope that seeks in spite of fear, when the future is clear. But give me hope like a child. But give me love like a child. Love of overflowing grace. Love that seeks a safe embrace. Love that calls to dance again. Everyone comes my way. Love. want you to note the tune name for that. Sally named the tune for the son who inspired the text. So Ezra D. His middle name is Daniel. And this past spring, Ezra's been taking piano lessons for about 8 years now, and he accompanied this at church, which it was hard to song lead without breaking down a little bit during that. We'll go to one more and then we'll have a little bit of time for discussion, I believe. Number 612, 612. A number of years ago, well in the midst of the hymnal project, a member of our committee named Mike Erb lost his brother to suicide. And one autumn, as we were preparing for gathering for in-person meetings of the hymnal committee, I was sleeping in on a Sunday morning, which I get to do because we go to Faith Mennonite and we meet at 5 p.m. That morning, I had a dream that the hymnal committee was gathered, sitting in a circle, and Mike, who had lost his brother, says to us, "I have a song for you guys." And he started to sing, and we learned this song from him in my dream. And I woke up and I wrote down what I could remember of what Mike sang. It wasn't complete, and as a writer and as an editor, I tend to be very suspicious of claims that the Holy Spirit gave me this song, because I often wonder why the Holy Spirit didn't have a better editor in this process. And so I took seriously the call that this was the seed of a song, and I worked on it and I processed it. And I actually had my son Ezra help me work out some of the harmony that I was hearing, and then sent it to the composer I mentioned, Sally Morris, to fix it for me, to fix the tune with me. And I worked with my usual text colleagues to refine the words. And it came together this way. And without my name on it, I sent it to Mike and I said, just aside from the committee, I'm just curious what you make of this song. I wanted to see what you would think of it. And he responded right away, "This is the song I need, and we have to put it in front of the committee." And so again, without names on it, everything that went through our committee that wasn't in previous hymnals, everything was anonymized. So everything you've sung today, they didn't know I wrote when they reviewed it, just as policy. We put this into the process. It made it through screening and got in front of the committee. And the committee had the same reaction, that this is a song that's needed. And then Mike and I were able to share the story of how it came about. And since the hymnals come out, I've been amazed at the breadth of circumstances this speaks to. I'll point out some things after we sing it. I'll sing through the first verse and refrain, and then invite you to join me on 2 and 3. When pain or sorrow is too much to bear, when your heart feels numb, unable to care, when faith seems so pointless that you cannot pray, when no one knows quite what to say, then hold on, hold on, to find our way to get through. And when your heart is gone and you can't hold on, We will hold on to you. If God is silent, need to hear that you're not alone, that comfort is near. If you are abandoned, when you need a friend, when all good things come to an end, then hold on, hold on to find a way to get through. And when your hope is gone and you can't hold on, we will hold on to you. And it looks like no end inside. No, all that is wrong can still be made right. You're never alone. God has promised to be with us, even when we can't see. So hold on, hold on to find a way to get through. And when your hope is gone and you can't hold on, we will hold on. What I found after I wrote this is that we have so many hymns of commitment of ourselves to God. We have so many hymns of commitment of ourselves to the church and the church all to one another. But I couldn't find many examples of commitment of the church to an individual, of the congregation to that one person who's going through unimaginable suffering, who needs support, who needs to be held on to. And the fascinating thing was I could find so many examples of this in pop music and in secular music. In fact, one of the inspirations for what I asked Sally to do for the accompaniment is a song from the musical Dear Evan Hansen that expresses some of these same feelings, that when you're suffering, I'll be there for you. And there's another song that does the same thing. Where were those in our hymnal? And so I think that's part of why this one has struck a chord for people. I want to make a note too about so many of these songs of suffering, that I think, just as when I wrote many of these, I wasn't experiencing suffering myself. I think we need to sing songs like this when we're not suffering, so that when we are, we have them. So that when somebody is, we're able to sing that support for them. Because songs that you only pull out once every 3 or 4 years, or only in emergencies, those never become part of you. Those never get internalized. But when you rehearse for suffering, when it inevitably comes, you have the resources you need. I think with that, we'll open up the floor for discussion, questions, comments, anything you'd like.
Question, so that they could hear.
Yeah, so
Bit more on the melding of text and music.
yeah, the question is regarding the melding of text and music. This is one of my favorite topics. As I mentioned, I started out as a music major before I went into working on words. And always when we sing, the music ends up being the senior partner. It ends up shaping our experience more so than the words. The words get sort of a subliminal attachment that we may start to notice after we've repeated things a few times. That's part of why I wanted to read most of these texts before singing them, because I know that, especially if you're sight reading, the text is about the third or fourth thing that you start to notice. As we sing through in a hymnal, we see one syllable at a time broken up under the words, so we may not notice what's going on. So to me, the pairing between text and tune is of paramount importance. People will sing a bad text if it's with a great tune. People won't sing a great text if it's with a bad tune. So things that I noticed just singing today, on the very first one we sang, in What Comfort Can Our Worship Bring, there's a line about when voices rise and strain, and paired with morning song that ends up on this ascending line, voices rise and strain. It ends up on the second highest note of the song on the word strain. And things like that just delight me, even in a sad song. So, for the hymnal, the process generally was we would consider a piece that came through in whatever existing pairing was available. And if there was not, we would just read through the text or perhaps sing it with a familiar tune. And then it was handed over generally to the tune committee to work on text tune pairing. And, you know, as chair of the text committee, I didn't get to be part of those discussions very often, but the tune editor knew that I wanted to be, and so would often bring in my input for those discussions because it's something I really care about. Especially when I began writing, I was often using traditional hymn meters as a way of making texts immediately accessible. So if you write a text and it goes with the tune Nettleton, which we know is "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing," any congregation that knows Nettleton is going to be able to sing that text on their first go at it. Since that time, and especially since working on the hymnal, I have a sense of sort of a generational need of the church to find its voice not only in its roots, but in its branches and in its future. So I get more excited about working with composers on new tunes now. And I don't often go back to the traditional meters myself. So if you picked up one of my hymn collections from GIA and looked through the metrical index, they are ridiculous. The meters are all over the map. There's not very much in common meter anymore in what I'm writing. So, just probably a longer answer than was needed there.
Are your hymns being accepted by other hymnals?
Yeah, in fact, long before Mennonites caught on, the question was, are my texts appearing in other hymnals? Starting in 2007 was when one of my first texts made it into, I guess, a couple of different hymnals that year. And I think there's around 15 or 16 different hymnals that have my words in them. Catholic, Baptist, United Church of Canada, Lutheran, Presbyterian. So the funny thing is, one of my most popular texts is "The Church of Christ cannot be bound by walls of wood or stone," that goes on to "True faith will open up the door and step into the street." It's based on the words of Menno Simons, and that's the hymn that's been picked up by the most different denominations. And just in Voices Together, Mennonites started singing it as well. So we're learning to sing the words of Menno Simons after about a dozen other denominations, which I find delightful.
Based on what you're saying about music and text, could a good argument be made then for screen projection versus working out of books?
That's a can of worms. In my mind, the accessibility factors of using screens are super helpful. And I find when people have the choice that, it's on the screen or in your books, I still find myself looking at the screen more than I do the book in front of me. I love what we have with the hymnal, that there are projection options with notation included as well, both in unison and in 4-part harmony. But yeah, an advantage that you point to is that the poetic form of the text is more available to you when projected text only than it is as seen in the hymnal, where everything's broken up by syllable. I'm affectionate enough of 4-part singing as part of the church experience that I grew up with that I wouldn't want to go completely that direction. But every once in a while, it certainly is a good way of re-experiencing things, especially if it's a very familiar piece that a congregation knows quite well. Seeing just the text as poetry on the screen could engage your mind in a different way in singing it.
I'm interested in your life. What do you do every day? And are you paid for it?
Well, since I stopped working for Mennonites, yes. Well, and I should say that the hymnal process was largely volunteer effort, but especially towards the end of the process, those of us who were on the editorial team in particular approached Menno Media, and to Amy Gingrich's great credit, she found money to help support us through the last year of the process, which I'm super grateful for. But yeah, it was an under-resourced process, as so many Mennonite projects are. I work now for GIA Publications, which, if you pay attention to the copyright lines, they've been my publisher for many years. And they're a company with Catholic roots in Chicago that publishes ecumenically. I started working with them in 2007. They published my first collection in 2009. And when my editor there retired, he passed the reins to me as his successor. So I work from my home office, doing the work I love, working with new text writers and new tune writers to get their work out into the world, mentoring and editing. I work part-time, which I love. The bad thing is I'm not super disciplined. So if I don't have the focus to be able to sit at my desk for too many hours, I just don't. I also go rock climbing at the new climbing gym here in Goshen quite a bit. And we have our 14-year-old son. So my days are only as busy as I want them to be, and I enjoy them quite a bit. Part of my work with GIA, there's a composer named Mark Miller, who I hope perhaps you guys have sung a little bit. There's one of his songs called Let's Walk Together. That's just one of my absolute favorites in the hymnal. He's going to be the resource person at the Laurelville Music Leaders Retreat coming up in a couple weeks in Western Pennsylvania. And I got to edit his latest collection of tunes, and we're working on a recording of his work now. And so I'm enjoying being in a position where I'm entrusted with that work and get to do it on a daily basis.
Who instigates the forming of a new hymnal or the beginning of a new?
Yeah. So the question was about how a hymnal project is instigated. one of the fascinating things in this process was just how practical that question ended up being. Menno Media got lots of questions starting really in the early 2000s, 2010s, people saying the spines of our hymnals are wearing out. Should we replace them or wait for the next one? And that was sort of the first first steps in Menno Media exploring whether the denomination was ready for new hymnals. Another factor was that Sing the Journey and Sing the Story, the two supplements that followed Hymnal and Worship Book, the intention was that those books would have a shelf life of 3 to 5 years, and that they weren't supposed to be durable beyond that, but they made them too well. And so those supplements held up really nicely, which extended the usability of the whole trilogy of books, Hymnal and Worship Book, Sing the Journey, Sing the Story, a few years longer. And so it was really these practical questions that led Menno Media to start asking whether MC USA and MC Canada were ready for a new hymnal. And it was their decision, along with those denominations, to recruit a hymnal committee and get to work. That happened in the early 2010s, and then into the teens. It was 2016 that Bradley Kaufman, now in Goshen, was hired as project director, and applications were put out for the rest of the committee and the other editors of the hymnal.
Can you talk at all about any of your texts being translated into other languages?
The question was about my texts being translated into other languages. That has happened a few times, a couple of times with my sort of cooperation and input. It's something I'm excited about. It's not something I can say very much about because I don't speak other languages very well. I can sort of interpret enough Spanish to sort of get by, and actually wrote a hymn in Spanish once, which I probably shouldn't have, but it turned out pretty well. I got a lot of help for that. So it's something I've been delighted by. There have been a few in Spanish. I've seen choral editions of a couple of my works that have gone into Swedish and Danish. And I'm aware, or I've spoken to somebody who translated several into Japanese. And that was a fascinating conversation because Japanese structurally is just radically different from English. One of my favorite stories from a conversation with this translator was, one of the most popular hymns worldwide is "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." And in English, think about that first line. What a friend we have in Jesus. So that's, 7 words that convey a fairly complex set of meanings. There's a we who is speaking, there's Jesus who's a friend, and what that means, and we're asking about it, we're saying, what a friend. There's a lot carried in that. And he told me what fits into that first phrase in Japanese. If I remember right, it amounts to something like compassionate. So basically, that number of syllables was able to convey one word, one sort of concept in Japanese, whereas it carried a whole sort of family of meanings in English. So it takes many, many, many more syllables in Japanese to convey the same set of meaning that an English text could convey fairly concisely, which is one of the differences between Spanish and English too, that there's just a difference in the number of syllables required. And so a translator has to navigate that. And so I wish I knew enough Japanese to look at what he did when he translated my works, but I would have no idea what was going on. So I think we're coming close to our time. Do we go till noon or
Take one more.
one more? Who has a last word for us?
Essner used to say, "Where would we be without music?" I know many of us remember our childhood songs, little others have remember lists for college classes by making a song up. What is it about humans, and is it a universal kind of thing? And what about harmony and musical experience? Or is it dramatically different as you go from place to place? Or what is the similitude of that experience?
This is one of my favorite questions. It's about how music can sort of sink in and resonate within us, how we carry it with us. I've had so many experiences. I think about an aunt of mine who was in a massive car accident. She was driving cross country with her husband from Oregon to Pennsylvania. They were supposed to stay at our place a couple of days after Easter, but on the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter, they had this car accident in Wisconsin. And I realized I would be the first member of the family who could make it to where she was. My Uncle James, her husband, died instantly in the wreck, and my aunt was declining quickly in the hospital. So I drove the 4 hours to Wisconsin and made it to the hospital. My aunt was conservative Mennonite, so I walked into the hospital and I saw a couple of people with coverings, and rather than go to the front desk, I just followed them. And I made it to my aunt's bedside, and she was mostly unresponsive at this point. But there were 4 of us there, myself, and a man and 2 women from this local conservative Mennonite community. And we would come in once an hour to Orpha's bedside and stand around, and the nurses would do neurological checks to see if she was still around. And at some point, somebody said, well, we ought to sing something. And so we sang, "When Peace Like a River." And the 4 of us, theologically, we're from radically different places and probably could agree on very little in terms of what the church should be like and what the church should do. But we held this song in common with one another, and we were able to sing it in 4-part harmony because there were 4 of us. And I held my aunt's hand while we sang, and at the end of the song, I felt this. Just 3 little brushes of the thumb in my palm. And I thought, it's wishful thinking, but I'm going to believe that that was her responding and being with us. And so the next time, an hour later, when we came in from the waiting room and somebody said, well, should we sing again? The nurse said, you have to, because her blood pressure went down by 10 points when you did. Singing, music in general, resides in a different part of our brains than speech does and language does. It gets rooted deeper, and it remains when so much else is gone. What we sing then is of vital importance. These words, these notes become part of us in a way that really can't be taken away until the very last. And that does appear to be universal. The style of song can be different. The way music works can be different. The instruments can be different. But those songs that we learn early on stick with us and carry us and sustain us later on. Now, the complicated part of that discussion is I'm also the guy that took your favorite hymn and messed it up. The text committee received the discussions of the committee and determined, well, what are we going to do about gendered language for God? What are we going to do about gendered language for people? What are we going to do about the ways our language is changing and the ways we understand things are changing? What do we do about darkness and light, which back in the early 80s, Tony Brown wrote a beautiful paper about how darkness and light imagery appears in hymnals and how damaging that is because of links to racism. That language of darkness used for sin is the same language of darkness used for humans. And so I'm the guy that got to take these committee recommendations and mess up these hymns that you have memorized. Now, here's the thing. What do you want your grandchildren to have memorized when they have very little else left? What do you want the songs on their lips to be? What do you want to reside in their brains? What images of God do you want to sustain them when they reach that point? So those are some of the tensions that we held. How do we honor the way that music seeps in and resides within us and holds us in a way that honors that persistent memory, but also forms and shapes faith for the future? It's a balancing act, and it was a challenge, and it was a duty and a delight to take that on. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of your class today. I really appreciate it.
Adam, you have led us through some very deep feelings that you've evoked in each one of us, and also a lot of thought for us to ponder in this coming week. And thank you, Jeffrey, for accompanying. That was nice to be able to sing it out. Our class is dismissed for now.